Good afternoon. My name is Valeria Cantos. Thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me to share this panel with Paulina and Leandro. So, as you know, COVID-19 has disproportionately affected Latino communities nationally, and we see this not only in terms of cases, but also in hospitalizations, as we can see on this table, which is a little bit already kind of outdated if we consider COVID times, where we're getting data all the time, that the number of cases in Latino people are almost 3 times higher compared to white populations, and hospitalizations are almost 5 times higher. We see that there hasn't been any there's been just a slight increase in deaths comparing the Latino populations to white populations. There are several hypotheses of why this is the case. And one of them is how disproportionately it has affected a younger cohort of patients within the Latino community compared to older white populations. That this is not the only explanation, that there may be other factors that have contributed to this. But even though this data is from August, the trends and the pattern remains up to present. You can, next slide, please. So in response to this, like Luis was saying, the COVID-19 Prevention Network was formed. And this is an association of prior groups that did research, some of them focused on HIV prevention and HIV treatment, such as the ACTG network, the HIV Prevention Network, but also others, including the infectious disease CRC. And the goal of this new coalition of researchers is to offer a safe and effective vaccine, COVID vaccine for the United States population, and also to test monoclonal antibodies as treatment for COVID-19, focusing in specific settings, for example, nursing home residents. Next slide, please. Oh, this is what I just told you. Next slide, please. So this slide shows an overview of the 5 vaccine candidates that are currently being tested in phase 3 clinical trials as part of Operation Warp Speed, which is a federal program that combines multiple agencies for the development of an effective and safe vaccine, including the CoVPN. So I'm going to give you a summary of what is going on with the current research for these vaccines. As you know, in the press last week, or it was Monday, there was a press release about interim results of the Moderna mRNA vaccine, which showed that in they have reached preliminary outcomes, meaning number of infections, after which they would do data analysis. And they showed that the mRNA vaccine was 95% effective in preventing COVID. So they had a total of 95 infections, and of those, 90 were seen in the group that received the active study product, meaning the vaccine, and only 5 in those who were in the placebo group. Another very encouraging finding was that there were 11 cases of severe COVID, and none of these were seen in the group that received the vaccine. All of them were seen in the group that received placebo. So this data is very encouraging. And the number, that's this 95% effectiveness, may change once they do further analysis, once we have more infections out of the 30,000 people that were enrolled in the study, but I wouldn't expect to change by much, either up or down. The other vaccine candidate that made the news the week prior to that was the Pfizer vaccine, which is very similar to the Moderna vaccine in regards that it uses mRNA technology encapsulated by a nanoparticle. This vaccine is not part of Operation Warp Speed. It was the pharmaceutical company who launched their clinical trial individually, which is why it's not listed here. But just to tell you that it's very similar to the Moderna mRNA vaccine, and that their results were also very encouraging with 95% effectiveness. Following up, you see that there's the AstraZeneca and the Janssen vaccine. These two were held transiently because of safety signals, which is actually good news, which means that the process is working the way that it's supposed to work in a clinical trial, where in addition to efficacy goals, we have safety outcome goals. And each time there is a signal, then the system is paused, safety data and safety monitoring is called. And then once this is completely understood and if it's appropriate, then they move forward to continue the enrollment. So this is where we are with those vaccines. Novavax, the Novavax vaccine is going to launch very soon in the next couple of weeks. We're gonna have one site enrolling in Atlanta. And then we don't have a lot of information yet of when the last candidate, Sanofi, will come to be activated. So that is the summary. I think I am done with my part of presentation. I don't know, I may have another slide. Yes, I am actually. So if you have any questions about what I just talked about, both Dr. Rebolledo and myself are co-investigators at the Emory Punts Clinical Research Site and at the Hope Clinic site, where we did the first mRNA vaccine, the Moderna product, and we're about to launch the Novavax product. So if anyone has any questions about this, you can put it in the Q&A, and happy to tell you more about it. And now I'm going to introduce you all to my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Rebolledo, who is going to continue the presentation. Paulina?
Thank you, Valeria, and thank you everyone for having me today and for allowing me to join the panel and share and answer your questions. So if you can go back to the prior slide, please, Luis. Okay, so I'm gonna just walk you through, and you've probably heard a lot about what the journey that a vaccine regularly takes, and the process is very similar. And for all different vaccines, it's just more that it's been expedited for COVID, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means for the different processes. So by the time that it gets to, so all of these phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, these are the phases that are done in humans. There's obviously the pre-clinical or the pre-patient phases, which entail studies that are done, either like from the start when somebody starts to think about the idea and why they think it's important and whether that infection may be a candidate for a vaccine to be developed. And then there come studies that are done in animals or in the lab with different types of cells where you start to see what the vaccine could potentially do to prevent disease in the animal and the overall, whether they're safe. So once that is done, then come these 3 phases. And so what phase 1 is it involves a small number of healthy individuals where we're testing to see if it's safe and whether there may be any very initial signal of some sort of immune response. So this one usually lasts anywhere from, like 1 to 2 years. And through all the different phases that I'll be discussing, safety is always going to be a fundamental aspect that is evaluated throughout the whole process. Once we test it in a small group of healthy individuals and we see that it's overall safe, then it moves on to phase 2. And phase 2 will involve hundreds of individuals, volunteers. And the idea here is, in addition to safety, is to try to see what is the best dose and how many doses will be required to start to produce some sort of immune response. And they'll start to measure in this phase if there's any evidence in like blood tests that there's being any sort of antibodies being like formulated or any sort of immune response. Again, just more in the laboratory setting, but not necessarily yet seeing what will happen in real life. And then once this is completed, this second phase usually lasts anywhere from like 2 to 3 years. Following that, then comes phase 3. And this phase is the one where currently all of the studies that my colleague mentioned are part of phase 3 studies. And these involve many thousands of volunteers. And again, safety is being evaluated, and then the efficacy of the vaccine. And what we mean by efficacy is whether it's trying to answer the question, so will the vaccine or this product work to protect people against the disease that we want it to work for? So in this case, whether it will protect if I come in contact with, or I'm infected with, or come in contact with somebody with coronavirus, with COVID-19. So, and what's important to note is that, you know, a lot of these processes tend to take, they can, you know, it can go anywhere from like 5 up to 10 years, sometimes more. And the reason why this has changed in COVID, it's not that there's no steps are being skipped. It's just more that there has been an enormous amount of resources, both from the public and the private sector, as well as academic centers, to sort of like put into the same pot to try to help develop all of these different, or go through all of these different phases. And so there's a lot of manpower, economic, as well as intellectual resources put in, so that once one phase is done, they can move on quicker to the next one, that what we traditionally would be expected in non-COVID times. And so, and the other thing that is really important, and I'll talk about in the next slide. So if you could move to the next, please, Luis. Is what happens, what are some of the processes that need to occur, all of the safety checkpoints that will occur throughout the different phases. And so once during obviously before any study is ever, any clinical trial is designed to be done or is wanting to be done on humans, there's an IRB, and this is a regulatory body that is established to protect the rights and the welfare of all of the participants in any type of research. And this is you know, when an idea, when a protocol is put together, it'll go to the IRB, and there's academic IRB. So at a university, there's overarching IRBs that control many different sort of like sections. And these go there, they evaluate the protocols, they come back with questions. And these IRB councils are made up of both, you know, many academics from many different disciplines, but they also have representation from the community. So a lay person who is not a scientist, and to ensure that, again, both the language is very clear and that all of the rights of the participants are being ensured and that they're being protected. And then after the IRB, the other, once the study is being done, so in phase 3, there's what we call the DSMB. So this is a group, and it's that essentially is made up of an unbiased group of experts. So in no relation whatsoever to the people conducting the study. And they're not also not appointed by the government. So again, independent groups of scientists that what they're doing is from the start of a phase 3 study, they will be reviewing what is happening in the study. And so they will be reviewing at different time points, depending on how it's set. But what Dr. Cantos mentioned about the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, that interim result is when the DSMB comes together and they overall sort of like review again the preliminary results and again the safety. So this group has the power to stop the trial at any point if they see any sort of like signal, and that's sort of what happened when the studies were paused for the AstraZeneca, when they saw that some of the, there was one participant that was ill. So these are normal processes that are placed to ensure that they can evaluate as the study goes on in real time, and that they can make decisions of whether it should continue or whether not. Once the study is completed or the results are finalized, and the DSMB also will scrutinize and will make sure that all of the details are very clear about what are the different processes and what the results are showing. So once that's done, then it will go on to the FDA advisory board. And so this FDA advisory board, it's again comprised of individuals from many different specialties, from academics, from experts in like clinical trials, and they will come together to review both what the particular sponsor, so either the company or the university who did the study, as well as the DSMB, what those results look like. And they will have a public session where they will discuss these, and people can come to the community, patients, participants can come to those and listen in on what the results, and then they basically will vote on whether this should move forward. And then after that, that's when it comes to the FDA, which in general, the FDA pretty much will follow what the FDA advisory board. So if they have approved it, then at that point it will be approved for licensing, and then the process for how it's going to be available, the post study phase will take place. And then the other piece is the last one is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, so the VARS. And this body, what it does is it will be responsible. It's a combination, and it's a combination of, or it's a program run conjunctly by the CDC as well as the FDA. And they will, for after the study has gone to licensure so that it's available, let's say commercially, then they will be monitoring how the vaccine is working, if anybody is having any sort of like any side effect. Both patients, doctors that give the vaccine, they can report. So it's an electronic system where you can go on to report if you think you're having a side effect from the vaccine. And again, it's to continue that very rigorous process to ensure safety. The other thing to just keep in mind is that in addition to all of these safety checkpoints, then there's other safety checkpoints that go on from the side of both the sponsor and the academic institutions that did the study, where, for example, for COVID-19, for the Moderna study, they will follow participants for a total of 2 years. And that is, again, to ensure that after they've gotten the dose, that they can see how these participants are doing, and again, evaluate the safety in addition to how well the vaccine works. Next slide, please. And then finally, before I turn it over to Dr. Leandro, this is just the information about the website that was launched on July the 8th, the PreventCovid.org. And this website is available in English and Spanish. It has a lot of resources and description about the different vaccine candidates that are coming through the COVID-19. And it includes a registry that anybody in the community who's interested in volunteering can enter their information to be contacted for possible participation. So what we tell people or our patients who may be interested, or that we hear from colleagues, is that by registering, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will have to participate. This is just sort of like, if you're at all interested, or you know of participants or members of the community, they can go on there, enter their information. It tells you which site is closest to your zip code, and you can see whether it's closer to your home or to work. And then again, you will be contacted, and then the full information will be given to you by the different program coordinators on the clinical trials and the recruitment teams. And then if you decide, then obviously participation, you move on to full participation. But again, it's just more the first step if you are interested to try to get information and registered. This is a really good web sort of resource, and and again, it's available in both English and in Spanish. And I believe Brian put it in the chat box, the direct link to the website. So with that, I will pass it on to Dr. Mena. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Rebolledo. So it was really important for the COVID-19, as early on we were able to see with the COVID pandemic that in the United States, different populations were being disproportionately affected. It was very important as we developed new vaccines to make sure that these vaccines were effective and safe, especially in those populations that were disproportionately affected. So for the phase 3 clinical trials, efficacy trials, which are the trials that are designed to see really in large group of people where these vaccines are both effective and safe, the COVID-PM convened several panels of 10 to 12 native scientists to review the protocols and generate protocol-specific information or reports to the larger, communities, representing, as I said, some of these priority populations that early on were identified as there was a Latino Hispanic panel of experts there was a Native American panel, and there was an African American or Black panel. Right now, 2 additional panels are being, considered, are being formed. One that's focusing on veterans, and the other one is on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So the COVID-PN panel of scientific experts is really, modeled on the NIH peer review process, and each panel member is a native scientist, they identify with a particular group that they represent, with expertise and experience working with these, communities. A wide range of biomedical, social, and behavioral science disciplines are represented in the panel membership, and the panel member, each panel member review each protocol, provide scientific insight and expertise, and prepare reports on other necessary communications to the larger community. The panel generate reports that communicate the science behind each protocol, the ethics, the significance, and the impact that the study may have in the community of this research. Next slide. So as you can see here, this is the Latinx expert panelist. I have the honor to be one of the members, and here with many colleagues that many of you may recognize. Next slide. So here, the first study, the COVID-PN lineup, was called the COVID study, and this is a study that Dr. Rebolledo mentioned, the Moderna study, known also as the COVID study, which fully enrolled 30,000 patients. As you can see, the distribution of people enrolled is not as exactly like, but it's close as, the US population in terms of the ability to recruit a large proportion of ethnic and racial minorities. About 20% of participants enrolled were Latinos, which represents about 6,000, Latinos or Hispanic individuals contributing to this new study. About 10% African American, which is not quite as high as we would like it to be. And in many ways, I can say that as the study started enrollment, in part, I would say that the contribution of the expert panels, right, advocating for more inclusion, more diversity in these studies really help, with Moderna to correct, some of the recruitment strategies, to have this. I mean, I think this is a good starting point, but there is no doubt that, if you really want to make sure that these vaccines that are being developed, can also, we can have data that demonstrate that they are both effective and safe, in those of the populations that we really want to use them, so we can protect them. We have to make sure that we can have, the members of our communities participating in these clinical trials. Next slide. So I think this is all we have to say, and we have almost 30 minutes left to really answer any questions. Dr. Cantos, Dr. Rebolledo will be ready to answer any questions that you guys, may have.
There are some questions here in the question and answer box. Tanya Cantos, she's asking, the Moderna vaccine is a one-dose vaccine?
I can answer that question, and actually that is my sister.
I was wondering.
It's so cool to see her here. She could have just texted me the question, but okay. So both the Moderna mRNA vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine are 2 doses of the vaccine separated by 1 month. And then the second question by my sister is, the Moderna vaccine has any restriction about the cold chain temperature requirement? That's a great question. So as you know, the Pfizer vaccine has this requirement of being in minus 80 degrees Celsius for the cold chain transportation. And it can only stay at warmer temperatures for I think a day or hours. This is a great advantage from when it comes to the Moderna mRNA vaccine, because it only has to be stored in 2 to 8 degrees centigrade, and it can remain stable at this temperature for 2 weeks in a fridge. So in terms of logistics, once we have the vaccine or vaccines approved, then these specifications or requirements in terms of temperature may impact where they are used. So I would foresee, I don't know, I'm just thinking, I would foresee that, for example, the Pfizer vaccine could be used in large healthcare systems like hospitals where they have this capability of keeping such cold temperatures then save the Moderna vaccine for more community-based vaccination procedures.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask everybody who is writing their questions in the chat box. It's kind of difficult to find them there, so could you please write in the question and answer? And while you do that, I would like to ask a question. I think it's Valeria, who you presented the different studies that are being placed. Why is it, how, or who determines which one goes first? How is it scheduled? AstraZeneca first and Pfizer later, or do that?
That's a good question. So I don't think there's still clear indication of if this, I don't think it will be something like we're going to do Pfizer first and then Moderna second. And then in terms of distribution, I think it will be based more on, like I said, logistics, like where could it be sent that will be because they're being mass produced, both of them at the same time currently. But neither of these are going to be able to reach all of the community quickly. So I think if we use both strategies, if we think that they both work, they have similar efficacy data, they are both safe, but there's only this difference of the cold chain, then maybe they can, the CDC or the DHHS can decide how to allocate each type of vaccine for each context. Like I said, hospital setting, primary care clinic, community-based vaccination center. And then the other thing that's important is that not everyone will be able to be vaccinated at the same time, because we just don't have the human capability to produce so many vials of vaccine at the same time. So the CDC drafted a 4-phase scheme where the priority group that will be vaccinated will be healthcare workers and those who are at risk for developing severe COVID if they were to be infected. So people ages older than 65, people with obesity, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, etc. And from there, go through the other phases of people who are also exposed, frontline workers, but are not healthcare workers, restaurant workers, grocery, food distribution, food processing, teachers. And after that, it will be kind of like everybody else. But
well, I'm going to be the last one, probably. So, Paulina, you mentioned also that phase 1 takes from 1 to 2 years, phase 2 from 2 to 3 years, and phase 3 also a big amount of years. And that's without counting the previous years of pre-human. So in general, for any vaccine, it would take like 10 years, 15 years.
Yeah.
So how is it that we, in less than a year, we're already in phase 3?
I think
and how is that going to affect the vaccine itself?
So I think the reason for that is and that's a great question and an important process, that all of us have tried to kind of get a wrap our brains around it on how just it's amazing how fast it has all occurred, and the reason why all of these phases have been transitioning right as one is done to the next one is because there's a lot of resources being placed and a lot of manpower, a lot of infrastructure being used from government agencies as well as from academic, from industry, from the private sector to sort of have all of those resources to try to invest so that a lot of that red tape that gets placed from one step to the other, or that it may be halted because there's not a lot of money and then they need to apply for additional funding, so that can sort of move on sequentially as opposed to having large pauses between the different phases. So that's Obviously, the urgency and because we haven't really experienced anything such as what we have seen with COVID, that urgency has launched and has created these very impressive collaborations across different sectors and disciplines in order to where we are today.
Okay, so there's questions here. Daniel Ravelo for the Commission is asking, what about vaccines being developed on different countries? If they're released sooner, can the FDA approve them for use here?
I can answer that, and the answer is no. Yeah, that's an easy one. The United States, has a very stringent regulatory process, to make sure that, again, the vaccines are both effective and safe. And because of that, no drug, or a medical instrument, right, can be used in the United States without going through that process. So they wouldn't be unless they are, tested here.
Okay. John Rojas is asking, any concerns for individuals who are HIV positive in receiving the COVID vaccine, especially if someone has low CD4 count?
So, yeah, so I would say, so it depends. I mean, they're different, Dr. Cantos mentioned there's 5 or 6 different vaccines that are being tested right now, and there are different protocols. Some of the protocols are allowing individuals who are living with HIV, who have well-controlled, disease. Certainly, individuals who are immunocompromised, maybe a higher risk of complications because of that, they're being excluded. I'm the PI of the Janssen study, the Janssen vaccine study, and for example, people who have CD4 count above 350, suppressed viral load, are being, enrolled in the study with no problem. But again, individuals who have very advanced infection, who may be a higher risk of any kind of complication, are being excluded from the trial itself. Not to say that if the vaccine is approved and is shown to be safe, they may not benefit from actually receiving the vaccine.
Thank you. Adrian Juarez is asking, what role do you see for social scientists in this process? I'm referring to items like vaccine dissemination, for example.
So I can answer that, or I can try to answer that. I think that's another very important field that that has been included in the process, but that will be very instrumental to ensuring that there's an uptake of the vaccine, meaning that people will, once it's available, that people will be willing to want to receive it. And I think there's a role for addressing, many different aspects and hearing really from the community as to what are the reasons why they may be hesitant to receive the vaccine, and just understanding, like we've been trying to do that, by participating in some of these webinars, and the social scientists are doing so to try to understand what are the concerns that the targeted population may have around getting the vaccines, and why. Is there something different about this vaccine? Is it the process of like it being done so fast, or why, for example, some of the things that we may see with our patients that the adults are willing to vaccinate their children, but maybe they're not willing to vaccinate themselves for this. So what is it about this vaccine? And just really listen and try to have that scientific piece of the social sciences to really help us understand what the concerns are, if there's hesitancy, why that is, and then thinking about frameworks on how that can be, that can be thought about and done in a constructive way.
Okay. Ernesto Hernandez is asking, it has been announced that the vaccines have like 90% effectiveness, but has it been announced for how long they think the protection will last?
That's a great question. And the answer is we don't know yet, because we just don't have enough time to see how long it will last for. So that is one of the objectives of continuing these clinical trials. Each clinical trial for each vaccine candidate has a follow-up time of 2 years, where people will be able to, where investigators will be continuously monitoring these patients, drawing blood, see how their immune response does over time. Is it maintained? Is it wane? So hopefully we will have that answer, but right at the second we don't.
Okay, thank you. Cristina Ramos Calan, she's asking, when participants are recruited for vaccine testing, do the participants reflect the same kind of conditions we see in the community transmission, high-risk essential workers? living in overcrowded housing and potentially exposed to higher viral load than other members of the population?
So I can answer that. So I think, that's precisely, right, with that we having, so much, trying so hard, to make sure that we, reach out and include in these studies, those individuals who are both at high risk of contracting COVID, and if they get COVID, they have high risk of complications. So these vaccine studies are really open to everyone, everyone who, who for safety reasons wouldn't have a contraindication to participate in the study. But other than that, many of the vaccine participants, certainly at my own institution, are healthcare workers and people who have a high risk of potentially becoming infected with COVID.
Okay. There is another question from an anonymous attendee. Do you have any practical advice for how we can encourage clients of color to feel safe receiving a COVID-19 vaccine when one becomes available, given that so many have historically and personally experienced such negative healthcare experiences that understandably create anxiety around receiving some sort of vaccines and medical care? Anybody wants to answer that?
I think, that's obviously something that is concerning to all of us, and that we have been trying, or I try to think about like how we can, get more buy-in from communities of color, because of all the, with due cause, the mistrust and the aspects that you mentioned that, that they have encountered and upon like medical mistrust and just the different sort of inhumane practices through the year, especially with African Americans and with other things that we see currently with Latino populations in the United States. And so I would say that it's really, it has to be like a comprehensive approach, and it's really, I think there's a lot of work that we have to do as a scientific community and as an advocacy community to really be transparent and try to be open to hearing what the community says, and not just saying like you should take this shot because this is what I'm recommending, but really listening to the community and try to see what is the best way to tackle that mistrust and just have open conversations. And I think that's why, when some of my patients may ask me in the clinics that maybe they're like interested, what I tend to tell them is, again, just sort of like listen to what these studies are about, and also be careful of the information that you hear, where you're hearing it from, and ask people that you trust in the scientific community or from reputable community organizations that you have traditionally reached out to. And because a lot of them are the ones that can provide you the best information, given that there's so much stuff that you can go on in the internet, and that it's scary to see, the different misinformation that is out there. So I think it's a lot of it is on us as physicians, as scientists, and as members of advocacy to try to talk to the community and hear them out and see what are their concerns. And just have open dialogue. I don't know if Dr. Cantos or Dr. Mena they probably have other suggestions or other or thoughts.
I totally agree with you, Paulina. One of the things that we have done since the beginning of the epidemic, both Paulina and myself, is to partner with local community-based organizations that are trusted in the community to deliver those messages. We can't do outreach to the community without the community involvement themselves. And the other thing is to be transparent, like Paulina said, in all of the processes and what our intentions are. As Latina investigators, besides the excitement about the science and creating knowledge, is really to optimize representation of Latino communities into our research. And I think that has, significant impact in how that's going to be appreciated when there's finally like a vaccine distribution. It's like, it's going to be the same people who were part of this research study who will be advocating then for its use, hopefully.
Dr. Mena?
I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, I think, the other thing is that as we think about, just what Dr. Cantos said, right, how we're trying to recruit individuals, and keep them engaged in participation in the studies. I think we're looking for populations that traditionally have never participated, in clinical trials, and may not be able to do it in the way that we normally do. So we have to think out of the box, and that means very often, having extended hours to allow people who work, to be able to come, to do things on Saturdays, to bring, enrollment sites, closer to where people live, as they may have, problems with transportation, childcare. So we have to really, rethink in many ways the resources that we're going to need to have in order to assure that these communities that are being, again, in one side, disproportionately affected, by COVID, but also that we really, think that it's so important that they participate in the trials and subsequently that they receive the vaccine. What are the things that we need to do to make sure that that we can kind of mitigate, some of the challenges that we may have to participating in the studies.
And also, as Paulina mentioned, bringing information to the community that is non-biased, and that's why we're having this type of webinars with workers that are directly included in these studies doing the research and treating patients. So John Rojas asked, does an individual generate immunity upon the first dose, or is immunity generated after the second dose?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is like the person that is vaccinated with vaccines that require 2 doses, is the immunity generated with the first dose, or is going to have to wait till the second dose?
I said, for every vaccine, right, the manufacturer selects, the doses that provide the optimal, immunization level. And for most of these, vaccines, with the exception, I believe, of the Janssen vaccine that only requires 1 dose, most of them, the optimal immunization level is achieved after 2 doses. But we know from other vaccines, right, that the fact that you need 2 doses to get the maximal chance of the best immunization you can get, it's possible that after 1 dose, there may be some partial, immunity, but that's information that we don't know, and we will learn as time goes by and we experience, we learn what happened with people who may only get 1 shot of the vaccine.
Okay. Mary Ferrer-Hubman, so if the follow-up will be done in 2 years, how confident can we be to get vaccinated if the follow-up or the clinical trials are still happening?
So I think, Maddie, the aspect of follow-up is for many different reasons. And one of them, to sort of expand on what Dr. Mena was saying, is to see again some of the aspects around, like how long immunity will last. And then if, let's say, the first year you're protected, but you want to see what happens the following year. And so whether there might be that the protection sort of like wanes or goes down, does it stay stable? And again, what sort of happens, because the other important piece is that as you start to vaccinate more members of the community, then depending on the level or that threshold that you need to hit, then you'll start to see sort of like whether it will start to go down, the overall prevalence that's circulating in the community. And so these follow-up studies, they will evaluate safety, but they're also primarily evaluating what is, your ability, how long your immunity is going to last. Do you have the ability to get reinfected if you didn't have any during the first year when you got it? So it's a lot of both, like safety aspects, but more just sort of seeing how it functions in a real life, sort of like as you've had the vaccine and what happens in the subsequent years.
Mercedes Chavez, she's asking, will people who already had COVID need to be vaccinated? And what role does COVID immunity play when considering the vaccine? Mm-hmm. And he says, thank you to your researchers.
So that's a great question. And what we're doing as far as the Moderna mRNA vaccine, and I think also for the Novavax, which is about to launch, is that we are collecting baseline serology, which means the antibodies, to see if someone has been exposed to COVID. And they also get a swab to check for COVID on the day of their first vaccination. And but we don't have those results when you give the person the first dose of the vaccine. So there will be data coming out saying, in people who were already exposed to COVID unknowingly, because we are unknowingly they had it because a lot of people are asymptomatic. We'll have the answer for this. For those people, did the vaccine help to create more or better immunity and how long it lasts for? or not. So we will also be answering those questions in the future.
Yeah, it's been very fast, the developing of this vaccine. So there's a lot of questions that we will be answering in the future. So John Rojas, the news primarily focused on vaccination availability and dissemination in the United States. Is there any info available on availability and dissemination in South America?
So like I said, the World Health Organization, and certainly, every country is having, its own conversation with the specific manufacturer. And I know several countries have, just like in the United States, kind of have an agreement, with a specific manufacturer for X number of vaccines. But again, it's going to be a matter of ability to produce, enough quantity. And just in the United States, worldwide, it will be a multi-phase process where the first vaccines available will go to the individuals at high risk of infection, healthcare workers, and then, subsequent phases will go to different groups of priority populations until you get to the general population. So it will be, a many month process, where production needs to be scaled to give many, drugs, for the rest of the world, including, Latin and South Latin America, and to everyone.
Anonymous attendee asking, do volunteers receive incentive for participation?
Yes, they do. Yes. they get incentivized, you know what I mean? And more than incentives, really, because again, it's volunteer. You're basically volunteering yourself to participate in the study, but we understand we want to give you, some compensation, right? For cost, the cost of participating in the study. Very often, we ask people to donate their time, 1-2 hours. We know that, as I mentioned before, people have, challenges when it comes to transportation. So there are, mechanisms to compensate, the volunteer for any expenses that they may incur for participating in the studies.
Okay, there's some more questions there. We still have time for questions. So if you have any question, please write it in the question and answer box. I'm gonna try to do the poll again. Let me see what comes. Launch, continue. I don't know where to go to the second one. Pause. Anyway, so we're gonna ask the question that I was supposed to do in the poll is like, if the vaccine gets available, please everybody write in the chat box and will you be eager to take it or no? Will you take the vaccine or not? We would like to know among the people who is attending the webinar, what percentage will take the vaccine? I can answer too. Well, it looks like so far. Yes, 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 yes. Well, continue answering because this is going to be, we can get information from the chat when the webinar finish. And we would like to know how many people of the attendees would be able or eager to take the vaccine. So far, it looks like most people will say yes, which is good for the community. All right. Well, it seems there is no more questions. We have to practice more with the polls for the next webinar. I apologize for that. And anyway, thank you very much, Dr. Mena, Dr. Rebolledo, and Dr. Cantos. It's been amazing to have you here today. And thank you, the COVID-19 Prevention Network, for organizing this in collaboration with the Commissioners and UnidosUS. So see you guys, everybody, in December. And thank you for attending today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.